Farm Talk on CFRU 93.3 FM. Welcome to another edition of Food Farm Talk, where we celebrate food and honor those who champion the cause of food in society. Hello, welcome to another exciting episode of Food Farm Talk on CFRU 93.3 FM. I am your regular host, Abdul and today marks the beginning of our Food Farm Thoughts series, a series of interviews with a group of students that work with the Food Farm Thought program as research assistants. And the first part of this is just to give a broad overview of the program and what it entails. And today with me here is Jeanna Rex, who is the education coordinator of the Arrell Food Institute, and my co-host Emily Duncan, who also worked in similar capacity earlier on in the program for the year. So, Emily, welcome to the show.
Yeah, I'm super excited to talk about the Food from Thought program that, and have this series run with the students who've been working with it for almost 8 months now. Yeah. And so I was a part of the first cohort of the Food from Thought group last year, and then at the beginning of this year was the education assistant for the Arrell Food Institute, and kind of helped get the program off to the races this year. And I'm really excited to see where these projects have gone.
Okay, that sounds good. And Jeanna took over from you right after you served in the capacity of the education coordinator. Jeanna, I don't know if you could just introduce yourself to our listeners. So,
sure.
Yeah.
Hi, my name is Jeanna Rex, and as Abdul stated, I'm the education coordinator with the Arrell Food Institute.
Okay. So, like I mentioned, Jeanna is the education coordinator, and she has been working with the Food from Thought program, a research assistant, since November.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, I got it right.
Mid-November, yes. Emily worked with me closely at the beginning to make sure that no gaps were all the gaps were filled in, and she's actually served a little bit in that role as we've continued on through the end of the program. I've leaned on her for some of those beginning details because I wasn't here. So it's been great to have her.
Okay. Yeah. So just to start, I don't know if you could just tell us a little bit about the Arrell Food Institute, because the entire program in one way or other ties into the work of the Arrell Food Institute. So what is the Arrell Food Institute before we go into the details of the Food from Thought program?
Sure. Yeah. The Arrell Food Institute was founded 2 years ago, almost 2 years ago, from a generous gift of $20 million from the Arrell Family Foundation. That money has served to fulfill the mission, which to transform global food. My understanding when I'm working with students is to transform global food systems, and we are educating or training our future food leaders in that capacity. The Arrell Food Institute also is attempting to elevate discussions around food, to improve people's lives through research, positioning the University of Guelph, or leveraging already its well-established reputation across Canada and internationally as a food and agricultural leader, and also working a little bit on policy and innovation in research.
Yeah, so generally, that has to do with putting the agri-food sector into the perspective of policy and other stuff, just to elevate its place and to place Canada as a leader in terms of the agri-food industry, which sounds very interesting. And part of it, like I mentioned, has to do with the Food from Thoughts. So what is the Food from Thoughts program?
So the Food from Thought is a research program funded by a $76.7 million grant from the Canada First Research Excellent Fund, which focuses on positioning Canada as a global leader in agricultural productivity and food sustainability, and seeing food as across the global landscape.
Yeah. So before I move into like the details of the Food from Thought program, because I do know that, like as you mentioned, it's a large project with like so many components, and one of it that we are actually focusing on in this series has to do with the research assistantship components. I will shift to Emily to tell us a little bit, because at the start of the year you started with like this cohort of research assistants. Can you tell us a bit about the research assistantship program?
Yeah, so kind of both the Arrell Food Institute and the Food from Thought program work together to train students who are doing research on agri-food topics. And then they kind of bring these two groups together. And so the Arrell Institute funds scholars, about 4 to 5 scholars through the whole course of their graduate program. And then the research assistantship program is a little bit different. It funds you over the course of 1 year to do this research program. But essentially, all the students are lumped together into a group that we collectively refer to as the cohort. And so part of this program is to give students a bit of funding, which I think is really important for graduate students to help them fund their research, but also give them a bit of a different experience of working in the agri-food sector with community partners. So the partnerships is a big part of this program. So how it works is at the beginning of September, the groups get together and we kind of have this 2-day brainstorming session about, what are the main problems in the food sector? And the students really kind of have a huge list of ideas of like how we can improve this. And then we kind of group those into main topics. And then the groups form teams related to each topic. So this year we had 5 different teams related to all kinds of issues. And then from there, they work for 8 months with a community partner related to that issue to produce some kind of deliverable for the community partner. And then at the same time, Jeanna and I have coordinated kind of professional development workshops and field trips to kind of give students a broader perspective outside the classroom about what it's like working in the agri-food sector, and a little bit more of an experiential learning program and getting outside the lab and getting, more experience than just, sitting down and writing a thesis, which is a big and important part of graduate school. But we're also trying to make sure that the next generation of leaders in agri-food have the right skill set to be able to elevate Canada's place in the world, in world agriculture.
Yeah, this sounds like a very interesting, I call it an adventure for the students who are actually involved in it. And like you've mentioned about like community partners, you've mentioned about experiential learning. So that means that the students have the opportunity to work with people off campus, like in terms of partnering them to help solve real life problems. So I'm just wondering, Jeanna, if you can touch a little bit on like who are actually the community partners, not like very specific to this year. What makes an organization a community partner?
So an organization becomes a community partner when they agree to commit to an 8-month experience with these students. They come to the table with a challenge. I know that Emily spoke about this particular year. Maybe we can go back and talk about the year before, which Emily was actually a part of that cohort, where the students came in for that 2-day workshop, and then they came up with all these problems across the food ag sector. And then those students, and Emily was a part of this, actually had to go out and identify their problem and then find their partner. Mm-hmm. So feedback from that group was that was entirely too much for them to handle, for them to do. The end was great. The deliverables were still there, but it was a harder process for the students. So this last year, of which Emily started out as the ed assistant, we actually came to the table with community partners already ready, with a challenge that they had identified as something that students could actually work on over the course of the 8 months. And those challenges would have been related to food and ag problems in the sector. So we had a nonprofit, 2 nonprofit, social enterprise, a nonprofit, an industry, Maple Leaf was there, EFAO, Ecological Farmers Association of Ontario, so a volunteer-run organization, nonprofit, or government organization, and Ontario Public Health. So it comes across a wide variety of sectors, public and private. So I think I answered that But so I just wanted to go back to make sure that we've come to it two different ways. So a community partner has to be invested. It has to really be interested in, yes, getting their problems solved, but also in developing leadership skills for these groups of students. Because as Emily said, like it's some of these students may come in and have only had work in their lab or might be working just on their thesis and are used to that kind of thing. So it does make students have to stretch, and the community partner has to be able to facilitate that relationship.
That sounds interesting
and can be painful sometimes for students, right? Emily can talk to that.
Yeah. So I'm just wondering if you've talked about the community partners and like the process you've gone through for the past 2 years in terms of the switch of like students finding their own community partners and now students being given like community partners like problems to solve. I'll circle back to Emily later to talk about more of like the process involved in terms of the experiential learning component. But just staying with Jeanna, I don't know if you can just give us an overview of what this year's cohort looks like, because subsequently in this show we'll be featuring each of the groups. So like tell us how many groups you have, what do they do, who do they work with? Just a brief overview.
A little sneak preview for what's to come.
Who you will talk to in the next couple of weeks. Great. Yeah. In any particular order?
Yeah, in any particular order.
Okay.
Yeah.
So what comes to mind is first the Ecological Farmers Association of Ontario, which Abdul, you are a part of that group. That was coined the climate change group, and I'm not going to speak to what they did. The second group that I can speak to is the Upcycle Kitchen group, which they worked with the seed. Our third group is the Food Waste group, and they worked with Provision Coalition. Fourth group is the Food Literacy group, and they worked with the Nutrition Resource Center within the Ontario Public Health Association. And our final group is 5.
Maple Leaf.
Thank you. Yeah. Is the Alternative Protein group, and that's Maple Leaf, Sustainability's division at Maple Leaf.
Yeah, and you can kind of see that there's some just colloquially call them the issue that's tied to the community partners. So we have a food waste group, but they work with Provision Coalition. There's always just kind of that title of what the challenge that we're trying to solve in the food system is at a very broad level: food waste, food literacy, alternative proteins. So that's kind of how the groups just kind of come to be named. But yeah.
So as you mentioned, this sounds like very interesting in terms of how diverse the community partners are. So which also means that the students have the opportunity to learn from like different angles. And just to stay to kind of highlight more in terms of, because I think this is important for listeners to know, for the little knowledge I have about it. These students actually come from different backgrounds, right? Mm-hmm. Yeah, so they come from different academic disciplines, and they are put together to solve a particular problem, which might even be out of their everyday.
and I think yes, there are a couple groups I know for sure from this year that it was definitely not within their educational research focus or area. So yeah. Lots of it. There were challenges for them to get up to speed in that regard, and then working across those silos, which is a great skill to have as you move forward in your career. But it's also, and it can be very challenging to do that when you're in a room and there's 4 different people in your group who have come with. Everyone has a different topic. Yeah. You can learn from each other. Is the idea.
And I think there's 20 students in this year's cohort, and so in thinking about that, I think we have representation from almost all 7 colleges at the University of Guelph.
Yeah,
so
I think we do.
Quite just a breadth of backgrounds and disciplines working on this.
Yeah. So just to kind of follow up on that and circle back to the experiential learning, you were fortunate to be part of this program the last cohort, which was the first cohort. So you've been through it and you know the experience that has to do, and you also serve as acting education coordinator at some point for this cohort. So I just want you to touch a little bit more on the experiential learning component of this program for the students.
Yeah, I think that what is really rewarding about the experiential learning program, in my opinion, is the group work aspect, because I think a lot of time when you're a graduate student, you're really focused on your single research program, and you might be working in a lab with other people or working with people who are working on a similar problem to you, but it's not the same as like being on a team and working towards an end goal together. And that's something that's really unique about this program, is that in grad school, there aren't a lot of opportunities to do that group work project. And I think that's an important part of experiential learning, because when you get to the workforce, it's really a one-person show. So you're always going to have to work with teams and work with people who've had really different experiences than you and find ways to communicate. And for me, that was really valuable part of being part of this program. And it allowed me to kind of think, it allows you also to think about the bigger picture of agri-food, because you might be working on a project that is totally unrelated to the type of research that you're doing. So it really gives graduate students a new and different experience and a different way to learn, which I think is really valuable.
Yeah, that, as I said, that always sounds like very interesting and sounds like a very good experience for the students. So just taking a short break to remind our listeners that you are still listening to Food Farm Talk on CFRU 93.3 FM with your regular host Abdul. And today I am talking with Jeanna Rex and Emily Duncan about the Food from Thought program and some of the work that has been done by the Arrell Food Institute, mostly specific to the Food from Thought research assistantship and the experiential learning component of that program. So just circling back to the whole experience of like having students work with community partners. Jeanna, Emily started and you took over. So technically, you've been in charge for a large part of the project in terms of the months that you've served, and you came in at a time when the students were actually gearing up into like the actual projects and trying to find solutions, which meant that working with community partners comes with challenges, it comes with like opportunities and stuff. I'm just wondering, through your experience working with the students, what are some of the challenges like the students face in terms of working with community partners?
Sure. The challenges that they can experience, I think Emily spoke to it earlier, is when you enter into a project and you're working outside of your own research area. Oftentimes these projects will start with a lit review, and students will have those basic skills to do a lit review, but now you're doing one in a completely different area of interest. That can sometimes be quite challenging. I think, and I haven't heard this directly, what I've observed as a coordinator is that there are deadlines that need to be met, and that comes on top of a whole bunch of work that these scholars are doing in their own research and in their own coursework, and their supervisors or advisor are demanding things of them. This project still requires like a 5 to 8 hour a week commitment with group workers, and that oftentimes you have to be very flexible because you want that community partner to be there for those meetings or those phone calls. So sometimes that means that you have to figure out how everyone can be there at that time, because that's when your community partner can actually have that conversation with you, which is a very important piece of it, is to continue that relationship with the partner. Other challenges perhaps might be in looking at the end project or the end product, what a group member or a group may decide they want to do may not be possible with what the community partner is wanting. So both the community partner and the student come and they have things that they'd like to see happen during the course of the project, and there have to be some give and take there. And so sometimes I've seen where perhaps some creativity on the part of the student may not be expressed to a certain point because of the needs of the project from the community partner.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to describe that tension of like when you come and have this experience to work with a partner, you might come with all these great big ideas, but then the community partner might want something different, and so navigating and communicating effectively to wind up with an end product that you're both happy with as a student and as a partner, that you feel like you've created meaningful work towards, even if it might be outside your comfort zone. I think that's kind of the main tension that comes with this project, but I think it's a tension that exists in real life that people experience a lot. So it is a learning experience in that way.
Yeah. Emily can speak to it because I think it happened. And so when she sits here and says this, she was saying that a couple of months ago too, but the groups weren't there yet, right? They weren't sitting where Emily is, where she's gone through it, and she was able to have that reflection and can sit and say, this is a valuable experience for A, B, and C. Like when you're in the middle of it, it can feel kind of crappy to maybe have your creativity not expressed or your ideas, but Emily is right in that is a workplace setting, and you're going to end up there someday working with somebody from another group, and you're going to have to navigate that relationship. So it's really, really great skill building, but as I mentioned earlier, it can kind of feel crappy when you're going through it.
Okay, yeah. So just taking it from there, it's a valuable experience despite the challenges. So what would be some of the benefits that, Emily, from your own personal experience, what was like some of the benefits that you got from like being engaged in this program? From your individual perspective, and maybe Jeanna can talk from the perspective of an organization.
Yeah, so some of the benefits that I felt that I gained were my project when I was in the Food from Thought Research Assistantship was actually very well aligned with my research goals, and that was kind of just by chance that those things came together. And it was a really good opportunity for me to kind of further build connections in that area. Our group focused a research project on big data, and so it kind of opened doors for me in that area of like building industry connections. And a lot of the skills that our project used were kind of from my background of social science research, of doing interviews and talking to people. So I think it was a good experience for me to help other group members who were from different backgrounds, show them, this is the kind of research that I am normally doing. How does that work for you? And then a lot of other members from my group were more experienced in kind of project management type roles and things like that. So I really learned a lot of skills from them. So in being in that group work setting, there were tensions sometimes for sure, but I think we wound up learning a lot from each other.
Sounds good. Jeanna, from the organization's perspective and like from your experience working with the students, like what are some of the benefits of like having the students to work with community partners or like go through that kind of experiential learning, which is not usually common? The
number one thing that comes to mind is relationship building among themselves and a team, that they have to really figure out how to work with each other, and there's growing pains involved in that. And then outside of that team, they have to figure out how to work with that community partner and navigate that relationship to make sure that they're happy. That's like the top thing that comes to mind, is that they learn how to develop relationships outside of their lab or their own school.
Yeah, it's a good experience because in the future, I mean, it depends what kind of industry you go into, but you will have clients that you have to deliver to, right? And so this is kind of a first step towards that. I mean, in grad school, your main person who your deliverables to is your supervisor, advisor, but then in this situation, it's someone else. So having that accountability, I think, is important.
Yeah.
So let me just try to like pull us back to like, I always like to, because most of the listeners will be in Guelph, and everything we do, we are trying to understand how it might benefit the city as well, or it might benefit those who are listening. So this is like a good learning opportunity for students as well, so the students get to benefit a lot from that. So I'm just wondering, definitely most of the community partners come from like the city just around in one way or the other, or just like surrounding areas. So like what does the city stand to benefit? Not just like the city as in the city council or stuff, but what does the ordinary residents stand to benefit from like this kind of projects?
What's the ordinary?
Just like anybody.
City itself, or any community.
The city, yeah.
Okay. Well, these scholars have been chosen as the brightest minds of the future to inform the food and ag space. So, I think the community in general gains an advantage because they have this group of students working on some of these problems in food and ag, putting their resources, their energy, their time, their experience into that. I mean, I know the community partner and the community in general gives a lot in that relationship because it can be, you do have to commit time and effort to those things. But in general, working with this graduate level of student, I think is just a boon for a community, for the university, for everyone to be able to get into their expertise, I guess, and of course, and help them grow in the process. But they're not coming to it as a blank slate. Like they are very, they're very talented young people who can help.
Yeah, and I think that when I think of the breadth of projects that have happened through this program, all of them have this kind of, I'd say an overarching focus on equity and sustainability and really advancing the food system and solving these real world problems that, food waste is a real problem that, and, food literacy, these types of issues. How are we going to address our, meat consumption in the developed world? What alternatives are there? They're answering really big questions and making meaningful research impacts towards questions that affect us all as we're all involved in the agri-food system. And I think that's an important part of how is this in a big picture way advancing the agri-food system towards being more equitable and more sustainable. All these scholars are at the forefront of that.
They're doing it in their own personal research, and they're the inquiring minds, and that's who I would want helping me out on a project.
Okay. So just before we wrap up, I do know that there's in the process of getting or preparing for next cohort, which will start in fall, so September.
Yep.
So are there things, I do know you are looking for community partners in one way or the other. So what message do you have to send out to people who are kind of listening and maybe if they work in organizations that might be interested, in terms of reaching out?
Oh, sure. We are looking for future community partners always to collaborate with the University of Guelph. It's a great opportunity. As Emily just said it just so perfectly, these are, we're working on issues in food and ag that they're pressing issues of our time, not to use an overused phrase, but and this is an opportunity to have a core of students who are dedicated to a challenge that you come to the table with, and helping you solve that challenge together in a collaborative team approach. So if you're interested in working with young researchers in food and ag in the food and ag sector, and are committed to their learning process, reach out to the Arrell Food Institute because it would be great to work with you.
Yeah, and that we're not just looking for one type of partner. I think that in kind of who we've worked with in the past, we really want industry at all levels, big and small, not-for-profit, and anybody who's working towards policy building or in the government sector, because as grad students, we're going to go out into the workforce and work in, that kind of breadth of different types of workplaces. So we're looking for partners from all backgrounds. Okay.
So thank you very much for coming in. I'm just wondering, do you have any last message you want to send out to our listeners? Jeanna?
No, I just want to thank you for the opportunity. I'm glad to be here, and I think it's going to be really exciting. If you're listening today, then make sure that you listen for the next 5 programs, because Abdul and Emily will be interviewing our 5 projects that we talked a little bit about today. So that's what you really should be listening to. That's the exciting stuff.
Okay.
I think this kind of set the stage of what this program was about, and kind of gives the listeners a little bit of a insight into what it's like as a graduate student working in kind of a different program. And super excited for the upcoming episodes that really dive into those agri-food issues a little bit more deeply and get that student perspective and the outcomes of their projects. I know that they're going to be presenting these projects at the Terroir Symposium coming up shortly. The Terroir Symposium is bringing together the food industry, and it'll give students the opportunity to kind of showcase what they've been working on for the next 8 months, which is really exciting for them. And then after that, these projects are wrapping up. So,
This all looks very exciting, and thank you very much, Jeanna Rex and Emily Duncan, for coming in and sharing with my listeners some of the experience working with the Food from Thought Research program. So, like I mentioned earlier, this is just the first of the series. And the next 5 weeks following this, we're diving into each of the projects that have been mentioned today. So, trying to give you more of an overview of what the students worked on, what their challenges were, and what their outputs has been for the past 8 months. So, watch out for the subsequent episodes, and thank you very much for listening to today's episode of Food Farm Talk on CFR 93.3 FM. Thank you for listening to Food Farm Talk. See you next week for another exciting edition.